Hi, I'm Amy Reyes. This week from Rheumatology Network, we feature two reports from the June issue of Arthritis and Rheumatology. In one, Dr. Frederick Miller of the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences shares new findings that show the presence of anti-nuclear antibodies in the blood is more common than previously thought. In fact, it's steadily risen over the last 25 years. It increased from 11% between 1988 and 1991 to nearly 16% between 2011 and 2012. Also in this month's issue of the journal, Dr. Ronan Mullan of Trinity Centre for Health Science in Ireland reports that rheumatoid arthritis and diabetes may be closely related. He and his team conducted a study of 92 rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis patients. They found that insulin resistance was independently associated with a high body mass index and swollen joint counts. And Rheumatology Network Katie Robinson featured a report this week that highlights the importance of exercise while in self-isolation, especially for rheumatic disease patients. She featured the work of Dr. Bruno Galan of Brazil, who wrote in Nature Reviews Rheumatology that disruptions in physical activity can lead to an increase in disease activity, fatigue, and pain. He urges physicians to support structural physical activity for patients, especially for those in self-isolation. And finally, in part 2 of our series of interviews on gout, we talk with Dr. Chris Parker, who is Chief of Rheumatology at Austin Diagnostic Clinic in Austin, Texas. Dr. Parker is passionate about educating gout patients who are inundated with misinformation, he said. In this interview, Dr. Parker addresses managing the gout patient. Welcome, Dr. Parker.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I'm Chris Parker. I'm the Chief of Rheumatology at Austin Diagnostic Clinic in Austin, Texas. I am involved in teaching and research, and I'm the kind of lead rheumatologist at the Alliance for Gout Awareness.
Mm-hmm. And what is the Alliance?
So the Alliance for Gout Awareness is a nonprofit organization that's really here just to bring information primarily to patients to help them really manage and control gout, primarily because there's lots of false information out there. The information age is great if there's good information, but not so great if there's all kinds of charlatans out there trying to sell you some kind of a cocktail or snake oil that doesn't really work. So we're here to really provide good information to patients that's trustworthy.
Mm-hmm. And so when was the organization formed?
A couple years ago.
So it's brand new, essentially.
It's brand new with the caveat that it actually started 10 years ago with one of my patients and I, and inviting other patients because we wanted to try to help just the Austin community 10 years ago. And on Saturdays, I'd invite patients to learn about what's new in gout and what works and what doesn't, and really dispel fairy tales. And it gradually grew and grew. And then it became a Facebook page called the Gout Support Group of America that gradually grew to thousands of patients all over the English-speaking world, and then gradually became the Alliance for Gout Awareness out of Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of support do you offer patients then?
Educational. So we have paper education, pamphlets. We do live programs in different cities throughout the United States. We have a website that has like videos that they could log on to and learn basics about gout. So it's lots of resources. And we also kind of tie that in to other diseases and disorders that can show up with gout. Like, for instance, many patients with gout have kidney problems, so we tie all that in so that it's all understandable so they can really try to manage the big picture.
Mm-hmm. So it's good, trustworthy, scientific information.
That's right. That's right.
And that's key. Yeah.
Nobody's trying to sell their, supplement or something like that. We're just here to provide good information.
Right. So tell me about the patients. What
Yes.
do they understand? What do they misunderstand? And what do they need? If anyone would know, you would know, I would think.
Well, yeah, that's right. And again, my patient Gary and I started this because he had suffered and struggled with gout for decades before he ever got to a rheumatologist and got his condition under control. And he's like, God, I was told so much false information because I had every family member and friend tell me X, Y, and Z worked and didn't work. And even if you just Google gout, you're going to get all kinds of, stuff where somebody's trying to sell you their X, Y, or Z product to solve their problem. Nobody was actually checking their blood levels to really get it under control. It'd be like trying to fix diabetes with never checking your blood sugar. That doesn't even make sense. So that's what's out there. That's the problem. Misinformation, false information, not doing the checks, working with the doctor, if you will, that kind of stuff. So we're trying to solve that problem with the educational, venues that I mentioned earlier.
So that was 10 years ago.
10 years ago, but gradually getting more and more to now. So we started off, just working here on a Saturday morning to the point where now we have live programs in different parts of the, United States, large cities. We'll have people come live, ask their questions, learn things, or go to the website or have a video conference. Listen, not just from a doctor. To me, listening to a doctor isn't near as important as listening to it from a patient who's walked in those shoes and they know how bad it is, right? And they know, oh man, everybody tries to tell me what to do. None of it works, right? Why? Because grandma doesn't really know how to fix gout. She just did what, she thought worked for grandpa. That type of thing.
Right. And now we have science behind this. And we have
Bingo, that's right. We have science. And we really try to take away the guesswork and let science and blood tests actually help us get the data and then act on the data in an appropriate way. So that way the downstream effect is you can manage this thing so you stop flaring up, and all of a sudden you get your quality of life back. That's the ultimate goal there.
So in terms of treatment for these patients, it has probably drastically changed over the last 10 years.
Absolutely. That is totally true. It's drastically changed because what you said earlier, we want science to help us answer questions and then use that information. So if you go back, and gout's been around, Hippocrates, the father of medicine 1800 years ago, knew about gout, right? He didn't know it was a uric acid problem. But over the centuries, all kinds of beliefs occurred. And even to modern day, a lot of people spend lots of time on thinking the way to solve gout is change your diet. That's what they believe.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, and even the doctors will say this, the fact of the matter is, trying to make diet do all of the work to solve somebody's gout is almost never successful. Because we're imperfect. We fudge our diet, right? We celebrate a birthday, an anniversary, right? And so you're never going to be perfect all the time. So getting new medicines that have come to the market, how to use them, what medicines work with which medicines and stuff, we can actually use that plus diet. It's not that we're disregarding diet. It's we're wanting everything to work together to achieve that good outcome.
Good. Now, in terms of medications, let's talk about that, because earlier this month, the American College of Rheumatology issued new guidelines or updated guidelines for treatment, gout treatment. This is the first update since 2012, and they're pretty confident some of these things are noteworthy. They have issued 16 of 42 or 43 as strong recommendations, which is a big deal. In the guidelines, they felt that in 2012, maybe people didn't take them too seriously because they were issued, most of them were issued conditionally. But this time around, we have all those strong recommendations. Well, for your patients, do you think that'll make a difference? Or even as a physician looking to prescribe a course of treatment, does it matter to them?
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that in my own clinic, things aren't going to change because the guidelines were published. Okay, I already had goals in mind, and as we talked about, but I think the value that guidelines give us, number one, confidence. You mentioned how strong are the recommendations based on the strength of the data or the studies. That's valuable to be confident. And then when you apply guidelines to not just the rheumatology population, but in my mind, lots of other providers are trying to manage gout that are not specialists. And they need the confidence that it's going to work. Otherwise, they're off doing their own thing, spending, like I said, all the time on diet, not medicines or whatever. So having real strong guidelines, I think, gives not only rheumatologists confidence, but nephrologists, family practice, internal medicine, other providers that really need to be confident, because gout is super common. It'll end up in all kinds of clinics because it's so common. So I think the guidelines are valuable.
That's good, yeah. And that's especially noteworthy because in rheumatology, because of the physician shortage, so many patients are seen by non-specialists.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah. And if they're not on the same page in terms of treatment, patient will drop their physician and they'll go physician shopping and start all over again and really get nowhere.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. And adding to the problem in this regard, there are, because gout is so common, there are other specialties like internal medicine or family practice that have published their own guidelines that unfortunately don't come out to be, rigid, strong guidelines like we have in rheumatology based on all this data, right? And so us publishing new, fresh, strong guidelines with great confidence will hopefully overcome a unwillingness to advance their guidelines up toward ours, and get that patient the care that they need, that they right now are frankly are not getting in many clinics.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Do you, I thought, maybe we would address mythbusters. We started out discussing some of that.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of patients are under the impression that there are natural therapeutics for gout. And so I wondered, what are the most common myths that your patients come to you with?
Yeah. Well, I'll say, because gout is common and there's lots of myth makers out there, there's lots of them, but the most common that I hear are cherries and cherry juice, super common. And so patients will drink down or eat tons of cherries or buy cherry extract, and other patients will want to use other food things and stuff like that, spices and herbs. So turmeric is still real commonly employed for really anything inflammatory, not just gout. Okay. Those are all real common. One of my patients talks about yams being important, and they can come up with anything in this regard, but the most common for sure are cherries, cherry juice, cherry extract, vinegars, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I've tried them and found no effect.
Yeah, they don't work. Well, the thing of it is, though, let me defend the patient for a second, though, or grandma. Again, old wives' tales. The thing about old wives' tales, in my opinion, is those wives knew stuff. Okay, and they made observations based on what they saw. So if grandpa had a gout flare up and he couldn't walk, and she gave him cherries or apples or French toast, I don't know, and then a day or two later he was on his feet again, she'd make that association. Oh, that looks like it worked. Next gout attack comes up, same case, that looks like it worked. 2 days later, and she starts thinking that's the solution, when in fact gout will go away on its own anyway. Right? It tends to be a condition that goes away on its own. And so we falsely believe cause effect, which gives us tons of myths and fairy tales in this regard. Because our brain naturally makes the association. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Common problem.
But is that also why that adherence to gout medications is so low? A patient may give up on a prescribed medication and go back to cherry juice.
Yeah, it's a factor, right? Because when you have pain, bad pain, that's really, making you a believer, if you will. Oh, when the pain goes away, it's like, it's a hassle. Do I really want to spend a copay on this? And they'll talk themselves right out of continuing their medication. And so it's really, then it becomes up to me as a provider and other, patients who've gone through this before. That's part of the alliance and the beauty is having very knowledgeable doctors and other providers with patients who have been through this path before, will, and walk this walk and say, listen to the other patients who are trying to learn, Don't listen to your brain when it says you don't need medicine, because it's coming back if you stop it, right? So the goal is really, doing a lot of cheerleading and education so that people hang with it and stop having these attacks permanently.
Right, right. So what works in your experience? What treatments have you prescribed that have shown some kind of effect in patients?
Yeah. So I'm going to start with one important thing to follow up on what I just said. What works? Consistency. That's important. The other thing is, you talked about science and you have it right. Get the data and act on it. Because here's what doesn't work that I see all the time. People think they're doing right, changing their diet, and they never check their uric acid level. So they never really know where they're at. Okay? So what really works is doing as good as you can with diet, taking a medicine. We have more than one tool in the toolbox, I'm happy to report. We can talk about details, but whatever you use, you got to check your labs and act on the data. So that means checking your uric acid level. And then if it's still above the goal, and really you don't want it above 6. So if it's anywhere above 6, you need a fix. It even rhymes. If it's over 6, you need a fix. And so I tell them that. If it's over 6, you need a fix. I keep telling them that. So that way the patient immediately knows what I'm going to say as soon as they get their lab results. You need to make an adjustment. Once you have that in mind, you could use allopurinol. That's a pill. Right? Been around a long time. It lowers uric acid. It basically makes it so the enzyme in your body that makes uric acid, it inhibits that, so you'll make less. Okay? And that's part of the guideline that says it's our first choice medication. You mentioned the guidelines earlier. Now, not everybody is going to get along with every medicine, right? There's no one size fits all. So we have other medicines out there, and the guidelines talks about those other options, to include febuxostat is another one. Some people use probenecid, which is a medicine that helps your kidneys excrete more uric acid. Okay, that means you need to have good kidney function to make it work. You could use combinations of medicines. We now, in the modern times, we even have IV medications that basically gives back the enzyme in our body that we lack, we as humans, but other animals have it, that breaks down uric acid into a very soluble salt called allantoin, and then it's easily, boom, excreted right out of the body, right? So in more severe cases, that's an IV infusion now. So in more severe cases, I have that medicine to really clean house fast, then I put them on a pill for maintenance, right? And so it's up to the doctor to work with the patient. Remember, it's a mutual, right? To organize a plan where you can get the data and act on it.
Mm-hmm. In some cases, though, it can become so severe, it could be irreversible. Is that correct?
It can become so severe that it causes permanent damage, I think is what you're getting at. And that's exactly right. So I like to remind people that it's not just painful when the attack occurs, but if you actually looked at those gout crystals under the microscope, you'll see they look like little needles. And they're always there, even if you're not flared up. So you're literally, if they're in the joint, you're getting all this little fine needles being ground all the time when you're putting weight on these joints or just moving around, right? So you're putting excess wear on your joints, and it can literally erode through cartilage and bone over time, which is, I'm saying, over years now. Mm-hmm. But I'd like people to understand what you just said, and that is that can cause irreversible damage, which you don't want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then in some cases, heart disease as well, and other comorbidities, that may affect patients. Mm-hmm.
Lots of comorbidities run with this thing, as sounds like you've read about. Heart disease, kidney problems. It runs with obesity and high blood pressure and high cholesterol. All these things kind of run together. Mm-hmm. So again, there can be good that happens here, though. So if somebody starts having gout, wake up call. Hello, this hurts. And so then somebody gets into the clinic, and we can start helping patients by taking care of all those things.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else you'd like to say in closing?
Yes. One important thing is this. To all those patients out there that suffer from gout, this thing is manageable. you can get a hold of this thing and make it not flare up anymore. Okay, that's important to remember. This is doable. You manage gout or it'll manage you.
Mhm. Okay, on that note, I'd like to thank you. I appreciate your time today.
I'm happy to help, happy to do it again in the future if anything new comes up that I can help with.
Thank you.